Okay. I was talking with another student I have in another class about virtualization of servers, which is regrettably something our textbook doesn't talk about a whole lot. Do you guys know about virtualization? Virtual servers? I mean, you have a virtual machine on each of these desktops, right? How can this technology be useful in a server environment?
Easy to control.
It helps, yeah, it helps with the management of servers. Okay. I'm going to illustrate this principle, and then we'll tie it back to kind of this file storage. The idea is when you buy a piece of hardware for, say, a file server or a print server. I think print servers are great examples of this. How frequently are print servers being utilized? It kind of depends on the context, but I mean, is this printer constantly going? Are you guys sending print jobs to this printer? From time to time, yes, but all the time? No. No. Okay, so the print server kind of, you end up with lots of use and then it's idle. Then there's lots of use and it's idle. So if you kind of average this out over time, you might be getting 30 to 40% of utilization out of your server if it's just a dedicated file server or print server in this case. So the challenge becomes, or one of the areas of where virtual machines or virtual servers starts coming into play is allowing us to have more than one server running on a single piece of hardware. Okay. So we can use a single hardware component and we can have that has maybe multiple processors and large disk drives and stuff, but those resources can be shared among multiple instances, multiple operating systems, multiple instances of Windows Server 2003, for example, that allows us to utilize the hardware more effectively. Okay. So that kind of begs the question, but I thought hardware was getting cheaper. Why would I want to buy fewer pieces of hardware and just put it all on fewer machines, using virtual machines? Why do we use virtual machines, Brian?
I see that we use the virtual machine just for practice.
Okay, right now we're using it for practice, but in a commercial environment, we use these virtual machines. Basically, we can run multiple operating systems at the same time. They can be all the same operating system, copies 1, 2, and 3 of Windows Server 2003. But the trick is, if we can put them all in a single box, then our system administrator only has to go to one machine. And so it simplifies the management effort. I saw a presentation recently from Microsoft that said that I think for every dollar spent on hardware, system maintenance or management costs about $3.50. Okay, that's your time basically in terms of cost. So it's in the best interest to kind of consolidate servers and not have a lot of extra hardware lying around. You take into account storage space and power consumption and inventory management and rotating hardware, and all of that goes into the management of hardware. That's part of your job as an IT professional. Yes, so it's more expensive. The more hardware you buy, the more time you have to spend maintaining it all. Okay, so if you can consolidate, if you can use a smaller number of pieces of hardware, and we can use virtual servers to further utilize that, that simplifies our maintenance. Now, that's the plus side of virtual machine technology. There's a downside of having virtual servers. Okay. How easy is it now to create a server? The idea is I can create an image of a virtual machine. I mean, we've typically used, there's a standard installation image that gets copied out to each of these machines once a semester, and it updates all the software. So we've normally done that. But with virtualization, what we can do is I have this image of a computer that's running Windows Server 2003. I've got all the settings, the network devices, the files, the user accounts. Everything's just set up. And installing a new copy of this just involves copying this file and starting it up. And it's like instantly pulling a new server out of the sky and just plugging it in. And within minutes, it's up and running. And then you can configure it. And so if somebody in marketing says, I need another file server, and you're in the IT department, you say, sure, I'll have it up in 15 minutes. And it may take a little bit more than that to get everything customized. But it's pretty easy to get these things up and running. So a growing challenge now is you can have companies that have hundreds of servers, all these little tiny servers. And I see if I can find this. I read about this on a blog by he's the chief information officer for the church right now. And he says, because we're a church, we're considerably more cost conscious than a typical enterprise. In an effort to save power, cooling, and hardware costs in our data center, we've begun implementing virtualization. We've been using virtualization for quite some time with our AIX servers, but now we've begun to virtualize Windows and Linux boxes. Most of you know what virtualization is, but for those who don't, I'll try to explain. In the past, when a team needed a server in the data center, we would purchase them their own server. Their application might use on average 10% of the capabilities of that server, or less. It was a lot of waste, not just for our shop, but for the entire industry. A potential, but not always viable solution was to load multiple solutions onto one box. So basically, have one operating system serving as the file server, the application server, the web server, the print server, and so on. But those solutions shared the application server and operating system, and consequently could interfere with each other by crashing the operating system or the application server, and or just utilizing too much of the computer's brain. So they'd be competing for resources, and if one server went down, it brought all of them down, basically. Virtualization allows us to load multiple instances of an operating system on a single box. So on one machine, we could load several solutions, each with its own instance of the application server, like WebSphere, and the operating system, in their case typically Linux. So if one solution crashes its instance of the operating system, the other solution is just fine because it's running on top of its own instance of the operating system. And because each solution was previously only using around 10% of the total resources of the server, you can run, say, 5 solutions on one server and still only use around 50% of the server's resources. You just cut your power, cooling, and hardware costs by roughly 80%, minus a little overhead for the virtualization technology itself. Pretty amazing. We have seen significant and maybe even extraordinary savings on our per server costs as a result of virtualization. The unintended consequence has been server sprawl. The ease, speed, and extremely low cost of creating a new server, because it is virtual, has increased the demand for servers. Without great governance and management tools, this is becoming a problem for most enterprises. It says, how are you dealing with server sprawl in your offices? Excuse me. And they talk about policies and some administrative tools. I didn't mean to talk too much about virtualization today, though, but I do this to illustrate a point. One of the neat things about having a Windows Server environment is that we can create multiple shared folders, and you can map drives, and we can have network drives that people can access. But it's extremely easy to create shared drives. We looked at that last week. Right-click on the thing, share it, assign it to a drive letter, and you're done. And it doesn't have to, you can do this on multiple machines across the network, and it's turned out very useful. The challenge becomes, as you start getting more and more drives mapped, then all of a sudden managing all of these different files, folders, volumes, and such becomes very complicated. So trying to find tools that will allow us to manage this complexity that's been made possible because the server environment has made it easier.